Hi, my name is Christina. Today I'm going to be sharing with you some information about my favorite subject, which is ceramics and clay and hand building. First, we're going to go over some differences, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the clay itself. There are two major types of clay when concerned with clay in your classroom. You'll have red clay and white clay. Red clay, one of the most common examples would be terracotta. Terracotta is, again, red. When using it in the classroom or just for personal use, you want to make sure that you have on items of clothing that you might not care if they get a little dirty, because if terracotta gets onto your clothing, it can stain, and it is very hard to, impossible to get out of your clothing. One of the most common examples of a terracotta clay would be a flower pot, the orange types of flower pots. The change from the red to the orange is due to a chemical change that I will talk about later. But the flower pots of that nature are the most common and of a terracotta or a red clay. The next is the white. The most common example of that would be porcelain. Porcelain is used to make toilets and sinks, things like that. Porcelain is a clay that is a little harder to use. It's not as malleable as, say, a terracotta clay would be, or just a general white clay. If using them in the classroom, you may want to use a red clay like terracotta or just a plain white clay, because it is easier to use, and you can build more things because you can mold it a little bit better. When you go down, so you know the two different types of clay. Now I'm going to tell you about the different stages that the clay can go through when coming from just something you find outside to a finished project such as a flower pot. The first stage would be wet. Wet clay is exactly what it sounds like. It's wet. It can be most commonly compared to Play-Doh. This would be a white wet clay. It is white clay, even though it looks grayish in color. You can bend it and mold it and turn it into like whatever you want to use it for. It makes many different types of shapes. It's very easy to use. One suggestion when using clay like this, you want to make sure that you keep your hands wet. As you can see, my hands are a little dry now from playing with the clay. Clay like this will absorb the moisture from your hands, so when using clay, you want to make sure that you keep your hands moisturized because it draws out the moisture of your hands. And when finishing, once you wash your hands, you want to put on lotion so that your hands don't become dry and cracked. The next stage of clay would be bone dry. This is what you would, this is what happens once you leave clay out to dry. When you have finished with whatever project or so you are making and you are ready for it to be like, oh, that is it, this is what I want to make, you have to leave the clay out to dry in a dry area so that all the water is pulled away from the clay. There's no more moisture in the clay and it's dry. An example of that would be this. You can see that it is a little lighter in color when we compared it to the wet clay. It's a little lighter. Bone dry clay is hard and it is very fragile. You can break pieces off very easily. So when it gets to this stage, you want to make sure that you are careful with it. Your clay has to be bone dry, and you want to make sure that you at least leave it out, depending on the size of your end project. You want to make sure you at least leave it out for a few days. If it is very big, sometimes even like a week or so, depending on how big it is and how much clay you have built into the project. At this stage, you can still add this to water. So if I were to submerge this in a cup of water, within a few days, it will eventually go back to this stage and you can still play with it again. So it's like reusable at this stage. The last stage of clay would be bisqueware. Bisqueware is the term once clay has been through the drying process, you will then put it into a kiln. A kiln can either be gas powered, like oven, or it could be something that you use with actual fire. In the kiln, once in this process, the clay changes chemically, and it is now it is turned into a bisqueware. It's very hard. The temperatures in a kiln go well into the thousands. It is very hot. It takes usually a few days it takes hours for it to reach that temperature usually, but it takes longer to cool down. So you usually want to have it in a kiln for like a few days so that you can make sure that everything is cooled down. You don't want a rapid cool down, you want a slow cool down. Bisqueware looks like this. It has now gotten that white color that we talked about. This is why it's white clay. It has to go through the chemical change for it to turn into this white clay. Once it is at this stage, you can no longer put it in water and turn it back into the clay. It has now gone through a chemical change and this is its permanent form. At this stage, you can now either paint it with regular acrylic paints or things of that nature, or if you have a glaze, you can glaze the object. Glazed objects require a second fire. So that means once you have finished glazing it or painting it, you have to put it back inside the kiln so that the glaze will come out, will cue to the object, and it will be final. You can get some that are matte finish or glossy. When using this for food, if you were to make a bowl, you cannot eat out of this. Some glazes are food safe and some are not. You want to make sure that if you're making an object that you want to eat out of, that you get a food safe glaze. Otherwise, if ingested, you can make you very sick. The last thing, one of our key terms would be slip. Slip is similar to wet clay. Wet clay, we talked about, was very malleable. Slip, on the other hand, is very, very wet. It is caused from taking water, putting excess water into clay. So it looks like this, and it is very sticky and just like really wet and very squishy. You would use this when building an object out of clay. It acts as like a glue that will help adhere one piece of clay to another. So if you were making a box piece by piece, you would use the slip as a glue to help each piece stick together so that when it is drying, it will stick together more and won't fall apart as easily.